Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video I'm going to explain the story behind Comcast versus Netflix, which is one of the most often cited examples of why we need net neutrality. In order to understand what happened between Comcast and Netflix, you must first understand how the internet works. The internet is not controlled by a single internet service provider or ISP like Comcast or Verizon. Instead, the internet is made up of a series of networks that are all connected to each other, often referred to as the web. When information is sent across the internet, it is broken up into packets and sent over multiple networks before it reaches your computer. The ISPs, like Comcast, provide the so-called last mile of the internet. Often the example used, best to understand it, is the analogy of the highway. Part of the internet that the ISPs control is the part of the highway that surrounds the city and smaller county and city streets and roads that lead to the individual homes. Continuing with this analogy, the cars on the highway are the packets of information. Net neutrality is the speed limit that forces all cars to travel at the same speed. Net neutrality is defined as the principle that internet service providers should enable all content and applications regardless of the source and without favoring or blocking any particular products or websites. Sometimes, however, due to congested roads, the cars can't travel at the speed limit. So sometimes cars or packets of information will not arrive at their destination at the same time. Video across the internet poses a challenge because it represents a lot of packets of information which need to be delivered on time. If some of the packets are delayed or dropped, you'll get buffering or pixelation. To get around this issue, companies called CDNs, or content delivery networks, were created to act as a series of warehouses for content, where this content could be stored closer to the end users. This way, it reduced the number of hops that the packets needed to travel and would speed up the delivery of the information. Imagine that there are hundreds of these CDNs, each with a small hose to the main pipe of the internet. At first, Netflix relied on these CDNs to help speed up their service. This was expensive for them, so instead they created their own CDNs, which were suddenly in direct contact with ISPs. And instead of having a small hose, Netflix was using a huge hose to pour its packets onto the ISP's roads. As a result, Netflix was using about 25% of Comcast's bandwidth and causing their overall network to be slower. Usually, between ISPs and CDNs, the burden of traffic is shared. But in the case of Netflix, there was a massive imbalance. In other words, Netflix was attaching a fire hose to the Comcast network, which was only able to handle the connections the size of garden hoses. The gushing fire hose of content can't possibly be funneled into a few garden hose ports that were available. So packets were dropped and service was degraded. Netflix could have fixed this problem in two ways. It could have paid for a fire hose connection instead of taking a garden hose connection that it can get through standard peering relationship with Comcast. The large connection would accommodate for the Netflix traffic. The other option was to distribute the traffic more evenly among other CDNs that are delivering traffic to Comcast. In this case, the video traffic could get onto Comcast network via many garden hoses already connected to Comcast. Of course, in either circumstance, this would cost Netflix more money. The company would have to either pay Comcast for more capacity, or the company would have to pay CDNs more money to deliver their traffic. In the end, Netflix paid Comcast for the required improvements. As a result, the burden that Netflix placed on the ISP was reduced, and a fast lane was created for them. The result was an overall improvement of the speeds across Comcast's network. Netflix and companies like them, though, lobbied the government for stricter rules regarding net neutrality. And in 2015, under Obama, the FCC changed the rules governing net neutrality from Title I to Title II. To understand the difference between Title I and Title II, one must understand that before net neutrality rules came into play, the governance of the internet fell into Title I rules, which involved a light touch government involvement of the internet. Title II requires heavy government involvement into the monitoring of internet activity and ISPs. Title II is the same rule system that created Ma Bell and stifled communications developments for decades. Heavy government regulations force smaller players out of the ISP marketplace, as they can't afford to pay for the high costs associated with government monitoring and would be forced under the rules of Title II to provide the same level of internet access as large ISPs. Think of the road analogy. In a rural situation, people might not have a road that leads to their house. A small company might come along and build a dirt road. Although it is slow to travel over, at least it's better than nothing. Under net neutrality, this would not be allowed, and companies would be forced to build a paved road. However, because there are only a few users in that area, no company would be willing to do this, and instead people get nothing. Because only large companies can afford to do business burdened by the high costs of net neutrality that net neutrality imposes with government monitoring and regulations, the result we get is huge monopolies like Comcast and Verizon. Also, under net neutrality, all traffic must be treated the same. So a mom and pop text site and a YouTube would be treated the same. This leads to the Netflix situation where the ISPs are burdened with floods of traffic across their networks without the ability to create special lanes to deal with this traffic. It is similar to a highway without carpooling lanes. As a result, you get all the lanes across the highway going the same slow speed. Under net neutrality, companies like Comcast can't charge companies like Netflix for the demands that they place on their infrastructure, so no improvements get made. As a result of net neutrality, internet speeds in the US are among the slowest in the developed world. The cost of the internet is the highest in the world. US is ranked number 1 for the most expensive internet. Basically, the net neutrality works against keeping the internet free. The current commissioner of the FCC, Ajit Pai, plans to roll back these changes so that it would fall back under Title I. So we would still get the anti-throttling rules without having the government watch over every activity of the internet. To summarize, think of net neutrality in its current form as the same situation that created Ma Bell. Heavy government regulations over the internet is not what we need. If you learned anything from my story about Comcast and Netflix, you should take away the fact that the two companies were able to resolve the dispute without strict net neutrality rules. And we all benefited from having them work out those differences. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give me your feedback, comment, like, and subscribe for more socially triggered news.